Hello and welcome to the Lost in Possession podcast. It may be pouring with rain outside, but things certainly got hot down at Stamford Bridge on Sunday as Conte and Tuchel squared up to one another, both during the game and after the game, as Spurs managed to get a late draw at one of their old rivals, which just begs the question, is Spurs and Chelsea the hot rivalry in English football right now? We're going to discuss. Start the intro.
Here we go.
We are here today in the aftermath of another exciting week of Premier League football. We're going to start at Stamford Bridge. The reason why is because it had everything. Not only was it a London derby, it was also a game where tempers flared, hair was pulled, and of course, goals were potentially controversially given. That's not for me to decide. I'm sure that's for our resident Chelsea fan and City fan to argue. However, this has begged the question with the Battle of the Bridge back in 2016, and of course this game recently. Tempers, there has never been love lost between Spurs and Chelsea, but we do want to discuss, will we say this is the biggest rivalry in English football at this moment in time? Even perhaps bigger than maybe what people think Liverpool and City are. I don't know. Remains to be discussed. But Jordan, let's start with you. What did you think of the game? And where are you on this whole Spurs Chelsea rivalry?
So, wow. First and foremost, what a game. For game week 2 of the season, that's the kind of stuff you want to see going down. I mean, there's so many different elements and stories and parts to analyze and unpack, from the game itself to the tactics to the refereeing and the rest of it. But I guess to start off with a footballing point, in terms of how the game was, obviously Chelsea, it's fairly obvious Chelsea were pretty dominant in the game. I think putting a fairly decent performance all round. Spurs had their moments, obviously, with Kane going through on the counter. But overall, as a Chelsea fan, I was pretty happy with the performance. I think I've made a point myself, so maybe a bit of indication, but a point of pre-season, saying maybe Spurs are a little bit overhyped at the minute. Bookies had them above us. A lot of people backing them for top 4 and maybe not Chelsea. For me, this performance kind of solidified what I thought. We will be in the top 4 battle. Spurs will be in the mix, but ultimately they're not ahead of us just yet. So it was the same old story there. Great game for the neutrals again. Being critical from our side. We'll get into a few of the sort of VAR controversies and all the rest, but on a footballing level, despite everything, we do need to kill a game. I've said it so many times over and over and over again. The difference between us and City and maybe Liverpool, given with the exception of the last 2 games, but City will kill a game. When they're on top, when they're dominant, they'll get the second goal, then they'll start passing it around and passing you to death and winning the game. The difference with us is we dominated the first half. Yeah, we got a goal. Phenomenal goal, by the way. But at 1-0, 50, 60, 70 minutes, whatever it worked out, you always sense that Spurs will just nick a goal. Lo and behold, they nicked a goal. And then, at 2-1, you think we've won it. But yeah, we need to learn to kill a game. And fundamentally, decisions and hair pulling and everything else aside, you have to defend a corner in the 96th minute. Doesn't matter. Whatever happens, you still need to win a header and clear the ball. So on that level, still a little bit of a way to go to compete really for the title, but a good showing nonetheless. I'll let you boys unpack your thoughts first, and then I'll get into the sort of reffing side of things. Jamie, what did you make of the game?
So this was one that was quite an interesting one because it's so early on in the season. There's not actually that many games where the top 6 play each other. Obviously, you've got Liverpool United next Monday, but really everyone was talking about Spurs, raving about their transfer window, and people were the opposite about Chelsea's. Spurs were shocking. There's no sort of excuse. They should have been battered. Like Chelsea should have won. If Chelsea won that game 4-0, I don't think any Spurs fan could have gone, well, that flattered them. No, Spurs were rubbish. It was just simple as that. And the goals sort of, yeah, you're going to go into it with what happened, but they were rubbish. Chelsea was so much better than them. And Chelsea looked awful against Everton on the first game of the season, where I was like, this isn't looking good. this isn't looking good kind of thing. But Spurs were rubbish. Chelsea were better than them in every single position. But like Jordan said, they've got to kill the game. You've got to go and score them goals to put it out there. Havertz had one before Reece James scored the second goal. Then you look at the sort of reffing decisions, the hair pull. I just don't get it. I just don't get it. Like, it doesn't need to be a flat line rule saying no hair pulling. It's basic. It's technically like common assault if you want to do that outside the pitch. How that got away with, like, and then Kane goes and scores. To be honest, I have Kane still in my FPL team, so I was quite happy seeing that. And you're both dropping points, just sort of, eases up. But in terms of that, nothing. But yeah, go on, Reece. What was your thoughts? Am I being too harsh on Spurs, or were they rubbish?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was a bit surprised that the hair pulling thing didn't get pulled up. I'm surprised at that. But I think overall, Chelsea had plenty of chances to kill the game. If you're looking for a hitman, don't bother hiring the Chelsea squad because they're not going to do it. Don't even employ them in a morgue because they're just not going to do it. So they had plenty of chances. I think it just shows how desperate they are for an out-and-out striker at this moment in time because I just think that I don't know. I just think that Spurs weren't great, but their mentality's changed under Conte. They know they're not out. They can play poor, scrape a draw, and I think that's quite an important shift for them. I think that's what will carry them over the line throughout the season if needs be. But yeah, it was quite an interesting game. But I think Chelsea should be the more disappointed of the two in a game like that. But I think the more glaring talking point is what happened on the touchline between the two coaches. Not only did we have a square up during one of the goals where they both, one didn't seem to take too kindly to the other celebrating. Then, of course, we had, that was it. Yep. Then we had Tuchel decide to run down the touchline Mourinho-esque, which Conte posted on social media about. It's like muttering under your breath when your mum walks off or something after an argument. So that all flared up. And then after the game with the handshake, it all flared up again. So, of course, we know there's no love lost between these teams, even dating back to the 60s. But the rivalry seems to be more intense in recent years, in more than ever. Definitely seems to be a lot more weight carried on this game for both squads in particular. So, with this in mind, would you say that this is currently the hottest rivalry in English football right now? Or would you go back with the old guard sort of game between Man U and Liverpool? Or would we say Man City Liverpool is probably the better rivalry of the lot? Jordan, let's start with you. Do you see Spurs as your main rival? If so, why? And would you say this is the biggest game currently, sort of right now in terms of rivalry?
Yeah. So, I mean, first and foremost, I think from a Chelsea perspective, Spurs would definitely now be one of the biggest rivals, unquestionably. Not just in terms of, league position. Generally, we've been close, but obviously proximity to London teams as well. And, we generally speaking, Chelsea fans fairly, passionately would view Spurs as one of the biggest rivals. I think so much so now that, Reece, you've said it yourself, speaking to a lot of Spurs fans, that many Spurs fans would now actually argue the game between Chelsea and Spurs is a bit more fierce and heated than the North London derby, which I never thought I'd say. But on a footballing / bitterness and ultimately drama level, I think it is. I think it is now the most exciting or most heated rivalry in the Premier League at the minute. What I would say is obviously there's different elements. So if you're talking purely footballing quality in terms of a current rivalry in the Premier League, for me it would be Liverpool Man City. So obviously two top teams have been at the top of the league for years, and the quality of those games is always very, very good. But let's be fair, as football fans, and it was very clear from the reaction on social media, pundits, Sky Sports, the lot, that everyone absolutely loved this game. You love the managerial kickoffs. You love the handshake at the end with it all kicking off. 99% of people would absolutely agree that that's what you want to see. You want to see the kickoffs. You want to see quality on the pitch as well. But that's what makes a great rivalry that people want to tune into and watch. And there's no question that in the last probably 5 years, Chelsea Spurs, particularly at Stamford Bridge, with that atmosphere, has been, seriously intense. The battle of it's even got its own name for the saga, Battle of the Bridge. It always delivers in intensity, always delivers on cards, and it's good to know that kind of Tuchel and Conte have almost adopted that, even though they've both not been at the respective clubs for many years. They're both kind of bought into that rivalry, and yeah, I absolutely love to see it. I think it is now becoming one of the fiercest rivalries on a kind of ticking all boxes level. I think on the others, as I've said, City Liverpool, I think quality wise has always delivered, but you don't want to see Pep and Klopp, hugging and shaking hands and complimenting each other in the build up. You want to see a bit of aggression. You want to see Tuchel flexing his biceps in the press conference. That's what you want to see. I think the
biceps.
Look, footballers don't generally have biceps or managers, so we'll let him go for that. He's not a bodybuilder. But yeah, other rivalries you mentioned, Man United, Liverpool, it's not really delivered. A lot of 0-0s. Other rivalries I don't think come close. So yes for me at the minute it is.
Interesting. What about you, Jamie? Would you agree, disagree, or with your City hat on, would you say that City United carries more weight? City Liverpool? Let's hear your thoughts.
Chelsea's biggest rivals are Spurs. It should be Fulham, but Fulham don't carry any weight to it, let's be honest. Or even Brentford are technically closer. They're the ones who should be really your rivals. But no, for Chelsea, Spurs are their biggest rivals. They just have been due to the Premier League and how long they've been involved. I disagree entirely with what you've said to us, Reese, and what Jordan said there. Spurs' biggest rivals are Arsenal. If they look at their fixture list, who do they look for first, Chelsea or Arsenal? And it's Arsenal every time. I want to do a poll, to be honest, just to prove you wrong, because I don't see it being any way that they're not looking at the Arsenal fixture first. They want to know when they're playing Arsenal. And if you went with the game, they've made about 5 songs just on the top 4 battle they had last year with you. Like, they care so much more about Arsenal than Chelsea. They don't like Chelsea. I'm not going to dispute that. They don't like West Ham either. It's things like that where West Ham care more about Spurs than Spurs care about West Ham, but it's still that sort of thing. I still think Spurs' biggest rivalry is Arsenal. And I think now Arsenal sort of coming down from where they were first and second every year with United, it's now a much more competitive game, whereas for years it just wasn't. And I think that's what's helped the rivalry. Otherwise, you could then start to argue the Chelsea Spurs one is. Now, Chelsea Spurs on the weekend was a phenomenal game just for sort of everything going on. But really, if you went on the pitch, there wasn't that much that was fiery about what was on the pitch, apart from sort of, last minute goals. It was more just the managers that caused that kicking off scenario, really, let's be honest. Where the first one, if Conte does that to any manager in the league, they will react the same as Tuchel. So it's more, I don't think it is the way that it's Spurs Chelsea. I think if Conte did that to Pep would do the same. Klopp would do the same. Arteta, maybe even Ten Hag. I don't really know if he would react or not. Probably because they'd be 4-0 down at that point. But it's more, I think it was not due to the teams. It was due to the way Conte reacted. And then the bit after the game is just more sort of slight bitterness. And Tuchel saying, I want him to look me in the eye. You should do it respectfully. When there's clear photos, when Brentford took points off you, he held out a hand at sort of like full strength, didn't look at him at all. They all do it. Everyone does it. In terms of the biggest rivalry, though, I still don't see it. One, I say the Spurs Arsenal, I think, is a bigger rivalry. That does perform quite a lot. Well, as sort of there will be red cards. There was one last year at Spurs, but then that game, because of the red card so early, that game just turned into a one-way traffic. But then you've obviously mentioned City Liverpool. That's competing for something, though. There is always drama in them games, but at the end, there's not the I hate you, you hate me, blah blah blah. There is always that respect. It's kind of a bit like what you can say in boxing. The boxers will have they'll have the match. After it, they'll have respect. They'll shake hands, and everything's fine. Whereas before, they're sort of saying, "I'm gonna do this to you. I'm gonna do that to you." So
I
that's where
think
I
on
kind of
that
see.
though, on that point, whose fights are you watching in UFC? You're watching Conor McGregor's fights because the build up, the press conference, and the ag. You know, the fight he had. I know we're going off subject a bit, but you want that. You know, you obviously you're excited for Liverpool City on a footballing level because you know it's going to be top quality game. But when Pep's going, oh, you know, Klopp's really good, and Klopp's going, Pep's really nice, and you know that's a footballing quality rivalry. But in terms of bitterness and hatred, I think that's slightly different perspective.
But there is also this, like, I get what you're saying off that, but like I said on the pitch with Conte and Tuchel before, I don't remember being much before the game slagging each other off. I don't think
Not
there was.
before, not before the game.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Before, only after, because of what's gone on.
Yeah.
And I think it wasn't due to Spurs versus Tottenham. Sorry, Spurs versus Chelsea. It was more because of how Conte pretty much went up to his face screaming that they've scored. And like I say, I think any manager would react the same, and then sort of more would build up. But in terms of sort of like, you know, big sort of like you're saying with the cards and stuff, if we talk about a game with probably the most cards in the Premier League history, it's Everton Liverpool. Like that game, something always happens in that game. Now, even though Liverpool are so much better than Everton, especially in the last sort of, I think this season and last season, to be even more of a gap than normal, there's always something going on. You had sort of like the Pickford challenge on Van Dijk, getting him injured a few seasons ago, and there's always red cards. So that's one I'd consider being a very big rivalry. Obviously, the stadium's a mile apart or something silly like that.
Yeah.
I still feel like that matters. I know it's going to be more Everton hate Liverpool more because of where they are. But then you mentioned sort of Liverpool United, both most successful clubs. Obviously, with United dropping down a bit. If United were right at the top, then it would blow, I think, Spurs, Chelsea out the water, and probably all of us out the water, really, due to the fact they're the most successful. I still feel like Spurs, Chelsea have been entertaining games, but just nowhere near. I can't say they're the top, and I think they need sort of like more defining moments where they're actually fighting for a title together, or fighting for a cup at least. I know there's been the last final probably between Chelsea and Spurs was like 2008, and that's when they
a lot of knockout games like semi-finals.
Yeah, you have had some of them.
2015 League Cup, yeah, that was the final.
Yeah. But if you talk about the Battle of the Bridge, like everyone's talking about the Battle of the Bridge, how that's where Spurs lost the title. Only mathematically, Leicester was still going to win it. Chelsea just frustrated them, and then that was a sort of great game for it kicking off. But there's never been a game where there's never been an importance of that fixture that I think needed to be the biggest rivalry.
Yeah, I think that's limiting though. I think if you're going to define a rivalry by
it's not purely on that. Because I could say like, let's say Brentford go on a title charge. I'm not saying, and it's City and Brentford. I'm not saying there's a rivalry massively there. But it's sort of been for a few seasons where I think it does matter. Like, and I feel like that's not actually down to Chelsea. That's more down to Spurs, really. But that's that. Yeah. Reece, go on. I'll shut up now and let you.
I mean, you could define rivalries in three categories, couldn't you? Local, historic, and competitive. So that, local will never sort of change. Historic will never change. It'll be probably the competitive side of things that might fluctuate. I do think I obviously have said that I believe that Spurs fans do see Chelsea as their main rival, just because they're more competitive with them at the moment. Arsenal, yes, finished 5th last season. That might bring some life back into it a bit and be more competitive. But if you look at the early 2000s, for example, Spurs' season was much more, we have to beat Arsenal, because Arsenal were vastly superior to them. and they couldn't get a win over Arsenal. And Arsenal saw Man United as their rival, because they were competing for the trophies. And then it started to close the gap where Spurs were able to get results over Arsenal, but they still couldn't get results over Chelsea. So again, the hatred burns there. If you ask Chelsea fans from 2004, they would have seen Arsenal as their main rivals because they couldn't beat them as often. It's one of those things. So it does fluctuate. But before I ask you my main question on the rivalry debate, I do want to peel up an interesting fan survey called the League of Love and Hate from 2019. Okay, so there isn't a more recent one than this, but there will be one. So just from your perspective, okay, ask fans to list who they deem their top 5 rivals. All right. Now, this was only 2019, so it's not long ago, so not many rivalries have changed. Now, I'll start with Chelsea, which for some reason the results were never gathered in, but they took out the 2004 results, which listed Arsenal as their main rival. And that was then followed by, if not mistaken, Tottenham. And then it was Man United.
Really?
No, Man United come third. I think Liverpool become a thing once Mourinho had got in charge. So that begs the question, Jordan, do you agree with that? Just quickly before I unveil cities.
So no, not United anymore. Obviously, if it's an old survey, then I can't argue with that many years ago. But right now, our top rivals are Spurs in terms of kind of that sort of hatred, local derby. Liverpool, there's always been going back to Champions League ghost goal. Chelsea, Liverpool's always been a big sort of hatred. Maybe Man City now. We've had so many battles over the years and kind of been competing a bit higher. And then, Arsenal, I'd probably say. And I can't really call Fulham. As Jamie said, Fulham, other than proximity, you can't call that much. But I think actually on that point, Chelsea, Fulham, I know Everton, Liverpool's a bit bigger than that. But I don't think that's
a lot bigger than that.
I don't think it is anymore. No one gets excited about Liverpool beating Everton 3-0 every game. It's not. Yes, there's a couple of red cards, but I don't think Everton have won at Anfield for 30 odd years or something ridiculous.
They won last when it was lockdown season. They won there in 2021.
Fine. So that might have been the only time then in 30 years. But
it was something stupid like 20, 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah, but ideally, in a rivalry, you want a bit where you don't know. Admittedly, we've got quite a good record against Spurs, right? But you still believe Spurs could win. Whereas Everton, you know they're losing, and it's just not. I don't know. For me, it's not quite the same anymore.
Okay, well, I'm surprised you haven't put Leeds in that list because they are an old rival of yours, and you do meet them this weekend. Yeah. But just for reference, Liverpool did put Everton 4th in their rivals.
Yeah.
Man United first, Chelsea second, Man City third, Everton 4th, Arsenal 5th. Oh. So
who have they surveyed?
Here's your one, Jamie. Actually, I found this quite surprising, and I think I would probably swap 1 and 2 around. Man City went with Liverpool first, Man United, Tottenham, Chelsea, then Arsenal. I'm very surprised because Liverpool have only put you third, but I would argue that one, your rivalry is competitive. It's more of a professional sort of rivalry. But
there is a lot of hatred. Look, Mancunians and Scousers don't get on. They just don't. And when you're at the games, there it is. Liverpool can say, "Oh, we don't care about City." They say it. They do. It just is. They do care about us.
They do, yeah.
We care about them. There's sort of when they're drawing to Palace, when they're drawing to Fulham, sorry, we're loving it. If it was the other way around, they'd be loving it. There is a rivalry. It is not over United though. The first fixture I look for is when do we play United home and away. I then look at the first game, last game before I even consider Liverpool.
Because it's a guaranteed 3 points now for you. That's why.
Well, it used to be the other way around, so we need some payback. We need to get the sort of the match record against each other up.
Excellent. Okay, interesting.
In terms of sort of like you said, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th being the 3 London clubs.
Yeah,
Spurs, I do get it. We've had some games where, like you talk about the Champions League, sort of the 4-3, where we won, we drew, and we lost all in the same night. Sterling scoring an offside goal kind of thing. there is a bit of a rivalry there. It's not sort of anything close to sort of when we play United or Liverpool, but there is still one there. The Chelsea and the Arsenal one, Arsenal got more than Chelsea. Chelsea, I don't really see much of a rivalry. In terms of when we're competing for a few games, there is.
Yeah.
But in terms of Arsenal, there was the rivalry because we were signing your players. So you began to hate us more.
And there was a period of competing quite regularly with one another in terms of the fourth place or, sort of things like that. I'm surprised Everton didn't feature there for City just because I thought there was local. But obviously, if you're going to go local, then obviously Stockport have to be there, but they're just too far down. So, just for reference, you've got Arsenal's rival. They listed Tottenham, Man United, Chelsea, Stoke, and then Liverpool. So, yeah, very interesting picks there. So this got me thinking, actually, just as we're on the concept of rivalries. I'm not going to ask you for your top 5. I'm going to ask you for your top 3. What would you say overall are the 3 biggest rivalries in English football? Okay, so not Scotland. I will allow Wales because they do play in England. What would you say are the 3 biggest rivalries? It could be, just in general.
Not Prem, all
English.
In general. So if you want me to give you my list first while you have time to think, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, go on. Need some prep time here.
The only reason the only reason that's the point, put it on the spot. I've gone for Man U Liverpool first just because of the sheer history of it. I know the games haven't been massively great, but it's not going to die. Second and third, I toss and turn between the 2, but I'm going to go second, Millwall West Ham. They don't play each other enough. But in terms of the sheer fierce rivalry, as we all know, that's very, very intense. And third, I've gone for Newcastle Sunderland because the rivalry there is fantastic. It's City versus City, one team cities as well. And the history between Newcastle and Sunderland as cities as well is massive. So I think that game is top trumps above all the others there. And I was tempted to put that second, but that's my top 3. So I've got no Leeds, Chelsea. I've got no Cardiff, Swansea. I've got no West Ham, Spurs, Portsmouth, Southampton, Palace, Brighton, Palace, Millwall. You've got Derby, Forest. You've got Birmingham, Villa. You've got Stoke, Port Vale. You've got Middlesbrough, Leeds. You've got Wednesday United. You've got Barnsley, Wednesday. You've got Hull and Leeds. York and Darlington.
Is this a challenge now to find one that you've not mentioned?
Yeovil and Weymouth.
That Yeovil-Weymouth derby, man. Oh, that gets feisty.
Southend, Broxbourne, Hoddesdon. Union is a derby. So
right, I'll say my 3, obviously on the spot. The one you mentioned, Reece, actually that not a lot of people realise because obviously they don't play each other as much these days. Southampton v Pompey. I've got quite a few mates from Southampton, and I'll tell you that's a rivalry. That is a serious rivalry. So that's the one that's probably gone under the radar. I can't disagree with Millwall West Ham. So much so there's a film about it. Do you know what I mean? So that is solid. But again, it's almost disappointing that they never play each other.
Depends who you're asking. If you're asking the police, it's quite good.
Yeah, they all take their annual leave on that day.
I believe it was the first team in England, Millwall West Ham, to had over 1,000 policemen in attendance.
There you go.
That just shows the scale of the rivalry.
The final one, again, I guess same situation. They don't really play as much anymore. But going back a bit, I would probably say Newcastle, Sunderland, sort of a 2-team city. They were at one point competing, and obviously Newcastle got relegated. So yeah, historically, I'd probably chuck that in the mix as well.
So I'll go. Yeah, I'll probably have to agree with the way that sort of I remember the last time it played. It was fans on the pitch fighting. West Ham, Millwall just is up there. Another one is Birmingham Villa. Like I remember sort of Birmingham fan running on the pitch and punching Jack Grealish on the back of the head kind of thing. It's and I reckon you didn't want to be around Birmingham that day kind of thing. So, and then lastly, it is a tough one to be honest. I had one in mind was the Sheffield derby, United Wednesday. That gets quite tasty, and that could be getting played quite soon, maybe in a sort of a while. But yeah, so I'll go with them 3.
All right, awesome. Okay, so that just about wraps it up for today then. But of course, we want to know from you, who do you think are the 3 biggest rivalries in football? You know, even if you're a Cambridge fan and you're gutted that we haven't put you versus Peterborough in the top 3, of course, West Brom Wolves, whoever you are, wherever you're from, let us know who you think. But of course, make sure you like, share, and subscribe.
You know the drill.